Oh yeah, I see myself now.
Well, folks, welcome to this Groundhog's Day event, the Food and Agrarian Systems Seminar. We got Dave Fischer here. Thank you very much for coming up from Du Bois County, and looking forward to learning about the Ultimate Beef Project, which you got some of your partners, obviously, here in the room, and Jody Smith couldn't be here today, but she's also a very active partner.
Right.
But I'm James Farmer, and for those of you online, thank you for tuning in, and those of you in person, appreciate you being here. But I'll turn it over to you, and thank you.
Okay. One more thing. I'm assuming the picture of me is what you're seeing in Zoom. Okay. So I'll try to accommodate those out in Zoom land with that. So thanks for having me. Again, I'm Dave Fischer with Fischer Farms. I've met a lot of you, and you probably have heard about Fischer Farms before. So I'm going to try to keep the overview to a minimal level, and we'll dig right into more of the research that we're doing, which is, it seems like, what most folks are interested in this session. So I will dive in, and feel free, please stop me if you got any questions. You got any, wait a second, what about this? Please jump right in. All right. So here. Okay, hit it twice. I advanced. All right. So real quickly, we are just down in Jasper, Indiana, close to Jasper. We're down here, so we're about an hour and a half south of Bloomington. We were a conventional beef farm until 2004 when we started selling direct. The farm's been in the family for well over 100 years now, like 150 some years. And we have been practicing regenerative agriculture, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So what is regenerative agriculture? It's a lot of things. You can Google the standard one. Some of the main things we're doing along with regenerative agriculture is rotational grazing, which I think a lot of people have heard about. We'll talk quite a bit about carbon sequestering and a little bit about kelp and how we reduce greenhouse gases by doing that. And again, that's going to be kind of the focus of the presentation. It's also how we're building topsoil. We do a lot of things to kind of limit the amount of water we use, as well as we filter the water before it leaves our farm to make sure that we're not adding, nutrients downstream and so forth. We do a lot of fun things with natural pest control. I think I released 60,000 ladybugs to our farm last year to help control aphids. That was a lot of fun. And then we do just simple things like soy biodiesel to try to reduce our carbon footprint. So first of all, I'd like to start off with this slide because most folks think of cattle farms like this, and this is typically how the media presents it. A cow, there's a lot of CO2, a lot of methane coming out of the cow, both from the front and the back. And that's what you hear about. It's basically like a car, right, going down the road, and it's producing all this nasty greenhouse gases. And what we're going to talk about is it's a lot more complex than that. And there's a lot more interactions going on and so forth. So I'll throw a question out there. Where do you think most of the methane comes from? From the belching or from the out the back end? Anybody got a guess? Nope. It's belching. 95% is belching. It's basically the microbes in the rumen are creating the methane, and it's in that first chamber, so it comes right back out their mouth. So what we're going to be talking about is a big project that we kicked off with the USDA last year in May. They basically went out, and this was February of 22, they announced, we want to do some climate smart projects across the country. So they're asking for applications for grants. We were audacious enough to apply for one, and Joseph and I worked on it for a long time. We turned in the first one in May of 22. Then we found out in September we were chosen to be one of the projects. They picked us out of 450 projects. They picked us as one of the 70. So we're pretty proud about that. We came into a November meeting. Heather and Joseph were on it. They said, okay, we've got an hour. And they started going down our budget list, and they said, we won't fund this, we won't fund this, we won't fund this. It just went on down the line. So then we spent about another 5 or 6 months in negotiations, figuring out what they really would fund and how we're going to run the project. So we changed everything in that time period. Kevin Ellett is here today with Carbon Solutions / Geospherics, which is our main research technical partner on this project. We'll talk somewhat more about Kevin's role in there, and then have Kevin here for any technical questions. Anything else you want to say now at the get-go, Kevin?
I would just say that the whole proposal experience was pretty interesting. I do a lot of work with Department of Energy on a different type of carbon sequestration, which is geologic. So you may have heard of carbon capture and storage. That whole framework is built up where today companies get tax credits, $85 per ton for capturing their CO2 and storing it underground and proving that they're doing it. So the idea with these projects is we hope through this partnership, USDA will finally stand up a soil carbon market for farmers, because these have been in development for decades. They're voluntary markets, but it's never really been formalized to where it really incentivizes farmers and gives them a new income stream to do these good practices. So we're hoping our research part and this huge partnership, which is unprecedented by USDA research standards, will lead to that kind of a new market for carbon.
Yeah. Aaron? So why Fischer Farms? Why were we selected? We're guessing a little bit on this, obviously, but we do have a unique ryegrass, corn silage, forage sorghum rotation, which I'm going to show you in about 10 slides coming up. We also direct market our beef, as you all know. And for those of you that don't know, IU is our biggest customer and has been buying from us for a long time, and great partnership as well, and kind of understanding a lot of these issues and so forth. But because we have that kind of end-to-end supply chain, we can do a life cycle assessment from when the calf is born until we put a steak on a plate at a restaurant or at a home. And so there's not a lot of other farms or packaging places that can do that. And we kind of go end to end, so we can really capture that data all the way. And then I think the Geospherics research team brought a lot of credibility to our proposal as well. And then also IU is a partner. Jody Smith, Kevin mentioned, or James mentioned earlier, she's involved in our project as well, helping with the educational portion to universities, just kind of explaining, all the different aspects of it. And like I said, it is a complex world. So our project, Fischer Farms Ultimate Beef, starts off really with a lot of research, which we'll talk most of the time, but then also about the production side, or the agricultural side, is also part of this project. So how do we go out and reach out to more farmers to get them to adapt these practices? And the USDA has given us incentive dollars to feed on to those farmers to help them convert. Because part of this is USDA wants us to grow, and that's part of this market expansion. They like what we're doing. They want to see all the detailed numbers and all that, but they generally like what we're doing. So they want us to grow. But as we've said it, and they don't want us to be that either, we don't want to have this big 5,000 head feedlot and okay, now we've grown because we've got a bigger and bigger farm. We're not the Yellowstone of Southern Indiana. That's not the end goal. The end goal is to have a lot more farmers work with us, same genetics, same feed program, same soil conservation program, to where they can also raise beef for our system. So that's on the production side. The processing I'll talk a little bit about, but basically we're going to have to expand processing to make this happen. And those of you might be familiar, we moved into a new facility in May of 2021, and we've got a little bit excess capacity in that facility yet, but eventually we're going to be adding on to that as well. So those are really kind of the 4 key areas. Joseph, my son here, leads our market expansion, really our sales and marketing portion of it. I should introduce Heather Talman as well. She is our marketing director. And so anyways, really good team to help us go explain what we're doing to other folks and try to get them on board. So what I'd like to dig into for about 10 slides or so is what is our annual process on the farm. So in about September or so, we go out into this corn silage stubble, and we no-till directly into it the seeds that you see growing here. This is ryegrass, a little bit of clover. There should be some wheat in here as well. But we plant that every year in September. And what's amazing is by October, it's looking like this. It's just really fast growing. I can talk about ryegrass for hours and what it's doing, and you can also see some of the other plants in there. There's some clover and so forth. So it's a mix, but ryegrass is really the center key part of it. And that's because of the tremendous root system that ryegrass has. Ryegrass generally will produce 4,000 pounds of roots in a normal season, which its season is September till May. So over the winter months, it's producing 4,000 pounds of roots, and it's out there growing. We've got 300 acres now. The cold snap does turn the tops a little yellow, but below that it's green and cows are out there grazing. All right. So, and I'll explain more of this later, but this picture was taken the day Dr. Lloyd Murdoch from University of Kentucky came up to our farm. So back in 2017, he was looking for a farm that had been doing ryegrass for multiple years because those roots grow down, break down into the fragipan, which I'll explain a little bit more later. And every year they make those little crevices bigger and bigger. And so you do it every year, it gets a more and more of an impact. So he wanted to see some place that had been doing it 7 years. He's most interested in breaking up the fragipan, and I'll explain that. But what we're interested in is breaking up the fragipan and putting carbon down in the soil, putting organic matter down in the soil. So again, our normal process, we graze it during the winter months. About March 15th to April 1 in that time period, we take all the cows off the fields and let it grow. And so by that time, the cows will have it grazed down tight. You take them off March 15th. By about end of April, it's about this tall. It's just tremendous growth. Last year, we didn't cut some till the end of May, and it was as tall as I am. Just really fast growing in the cool weather. It's got to be below 85 degrees. Ryegrass is a C3 plant that likes that cool temperature versus corn that likes the warm temperature. So we cut it, put it in these little windrows, and then we have this chopping machine that comes along, chops it into little inch and a half pieces, blows it on the truck. And this is basically grass clippings, just like in your yard, right? So we take a whole truckload of those grass clippings and we put them into our bunker, which is just basically a concrete slab with concrete walls. We pack it down tight to get all the air out of it. And then we go into this anaerobic silage fermentation process that takes about 6 weeks. And once that is over with, the silage is very stable. It's not going to rot on you. But it's broken down some of the lignin in the grass to make it even more palatable. So this is what's going on. One of the other crazy things about ryegrass is it loves nitrogen, which as we're getting into this carbon analysis, it's good and it's bad. It sucks up all the nitrogen that's out there. My neighbor who I convinced to plant ryegrass, and he's a dairy farmer, this fall, he planted his ryegrass 1st of September. He put on a lot of cattle manure, a lot of liquid cattle manure from their big dairy farm. The grass was probably a foot tall I think it was about the 1st of November when we were looking at it. And he had taken some and sent it off to a lab to be analyzed. And that ryegrass was 41% protein, which is incredibly high. Normally, ryegrass is anywhere from 9 to, I would say, the highest I've seen is like 18%. So what it does as a plant is it loves its nitrogen, it sucks it up into the plant and holds it kind of until it needs it. So the great thing is it's not out there to be leached. When we had the 6.5 inches of rain in January, there wasn't much nitrogen in the ground for it to leach out. It was all being held up by the plant. So that's one of the cool things as we're going through it and kind of figuring this out. And it is the only plant we've seen with that much nitrogen sucking capability, if you will. Scavenging capability is probably a better term. So then after we chop off that grass, then We apply manure. First of all, we have the manure from our finishing barns, which is a mixture of the cattle manure and sawdust, somewhere around a 50-50 ratio, which is an interesting carbon to nitrogen ratio that we think we can get into more composting with it. And that's one thing we're looking into, is composting better for our carbon footprint than just applying the manure on the field. And yeah, it's not a good answer yet. But we apply the manure, and you can see some of the manure. But this, in between these rows of corn, is the ryegrass that we had cut. So you just see it's starting to come back, but the corn's already up and on its way. And there's no tillage other than right where we just make a slit in the ground to put that seed down for the corn. So it holds the soil in place, but also when you don't till the soil, you don't expose the organic matter in the soil to the oxygen and to where it then releases up in the atmosphere. So when you see all these fields that have been tilled in the fall, what they're doing is basically just all winter long, that's exposed carbon dioxide's going up in the air. Like I said, there's a lot of little variables in this, aren't there, Kevin? So the corn grows then for about 100 days. So interesting thing, out of 365 days, corn's on the field about 100, ryegrass is on about 250 days. So, but obviously during those hot summer days, corn is growing great. It loves all that organic matter we put on. And then we come through that same machine, different front end on it. And now we're chopping that whole corn stalk all the way down to about 12 inches or so. We chop that, the stalk, the ear, the leaves, everything into these inch and a half long pieces that again now go fermented. And that makes really good cattle feed. Okay. So then as soon as we chop off that silage, we come right back in and plant ryegrass again. So this is my lovely wife and his mom, who is she's actually the CEO of our meat business, and she is there every day making everything. So she's standing out here in the field of ryegrass, which she loves to go walk around with me in every evening. You can just see the roots from the ryegrass, the roots from the corn going down deep. Not only as those roots die, that's adding carbon to the soil, but also the exudates are adding carbon to the soil. So basically, as a plant is growing, one interesting thing is corn sucks in 18 tons of carbon dioxide per acre. So how much is 18 tons? It's basically 18 hot air balloons of carbon dioxide per acre of corn is getting basically sucked into those plants for that plant to grow. That plant produces, a carbon filled plant. It's like 43% of the plant is carbon itself. A lot of that carbon gets sucked into here, put in the plant. Some of it goes into the root, actually that physical root, but some of it, the plant gives off as exudates through the roots to the microbes in the soil. And they're doing that, they're giving off those carbohydrates basically to feed those microbes. And there's a lot of discussion that the plants actually know which carbohydrates to send to feed which microbes, because those microbes are giving them the nutrients that they want. There's a symbiotic relationship between the plants and the microbes. But just by doing that, they're putting carbon down in the soil. Anytime they're putting the carbohydrates. Now, what happens to that carbon gets really complex because microbes are eating it. Are they belching back out CO2? And so forth. So there's that whole world of soil carbon sequestration and release and so forth. Like I said, there's a lot of pieces to this. So this is Dr. Lloyd Murdoch. He came and analyzed our soils. And quite frankly, when I first started planting ryegrass, which was in 2010, because it had been 7 years before he came in, we started planting ryegrass because of the tremendous growth we got, but also because of those roots on top. And I thought, these roots, the first top 6 inches, we're getting so much roots. It kind of holds my cows up. It's like a sod that the cows in the winter months can go out and walk on and not muck up the field so bad. So that's why I went to ryegrass. I had no idea it was doing 4 feet deep roots. So he came on October 17th, dug down deep. He didn't go as deep as Kevin's going, but he went down to at least 29 inches because I remember we found a root 29 inches deep, and that had just been planted about 45 days earlier. So real quickly, it's putting those roots down in the ground. And what he determined was, it was really interesting how he did it. Next to this actual field that she's standing in, there was a field that we had not switched to ryegrass and corn silage. And it was on the same slope. Previous to this, it had the same management practices for probably 100 years. Basically, I broke one field in half. The one half had some hillier parts. I said, I'm just going to leave this in power. I'm going to put this in pasture, right? Thinking I was actually benefiting the soil by just leaving it in pasture and not planting this corn ryegrass. What he showed me is it was just the opposite. Where we had the ryegrass and corn silage, we had really built the soil. So this is what we had previously, just less than 4 inches of topsoil, which is very typical for our farm and our area. Subsoil, we had about 15 inches, and our hard fragipan started at about 18.5 inches deep. And that's where this is. I think I've got another picture of it here. Watch my time here a little bit, but basically, the fragipan is the part of the soil that was built 300 million years ago. This subsoil portion is about 20,000 years old. This top soil is probably 1,000 to 2,000 years old. It just, when you get down to this was a really hard deposit made a long time ago. I think a lot of it blew in from out west. And then this top portion went through floods and ice ages and all that, and it routinely got scraped off and started anew. So, and what we're really looking at is this portion, but then with Dr. Murdoch, what he said is, by doing the ryegrass for 7 years, adding the manure, doing the corn silage, we took the topsoil from less than 4 inches to almost 10 inches, which is really exciting for me. Then the subsoil got pushed down to where it's now almost 22 inches thick versus 15 inches. And now our fragipan is all the way down at 31 inches. And as we get into this water conservation and so forth, what's wonderful about all this is for every inch of topsoil or subsoil that we add a 2 days worth of holding capacity. So as I remember, we were at 14, I'm getting messed up on the math here, but basically we had increased the water holding capacity by 2 weeks. So when it doesn't rain, you got your corn plant out there in July, it's not suffering near as much. It's still growing and so forth. And we've seen this with comparing our fields with our neighbor fields. And I work with a couple of our neighbors quite a bit. They notice this. This is what got my neighbor that's a dairy farmer to switch to ryegrass. He was doing just wheat in the winter months because of that water holding capacity. It just allows our crops to hang in there longer. We used to irrigate back in 2012 when we had the awful drought. We irrigated. For the most part, we've stopped irrigating them. And quite a few of you were out at the farm. I don't know if you were there, Tajamel, the last time when we were digging in the dirt. Yeah, it was October 21st, 2 years ago. But anyways, we were out there and out in the woods where we dug, the ground was real dry. And then if you remember when we go over into the field, you could still feel the moisture just a couple inches down. And it had not rained for like 7 weeks. Because of that organic matter, it just holds the moisture so much better. So let's add a little complexity then to this picture. So we start off with just this, right? But now what we really need to look at is, well, how much carbon are we pulling out of the air, right? And how much carbon goes back up? How much are we putting down into the soil, right? All those complexities get added to it to really look at the whole picture. You know, as a farm, with cattle being part of it, how much carbon are we taking out of the air, putting into the ground, and what's the whole life cycle assessment of it? Okay. In comes geospherics to help us figure this all out. And I put the plus there because it's Kevin's team. Plus, he's also pulled in Dr. Craig Rasmussen from the University of Arizona, who's really leading kind of the soil portion of it. Kate is an IU intern / employee who actually was going to be here today.
Yeah, I don't know what you can make.
Yeah. But anyways, she's been a big help with it. And Dr. Fu is at Purdue, and he's really leading up the whole life cycle assessment portion of it. So it's kind of the soil gurus, and then we've got a life cycle assessment, and Kevin and Kate are kind of pulling it all together for us. And that's their refrigerator full of soil samples. Yeah.
Fischer Farms beef.
So they came out to our farm in June of this year, and we just mapped out a bunch of different fields. This is actually a network farmer of ours who grazes some of our cattle for us in the summer months. And we just went out and said, okay, where would be good places to take soil samples? You know, we tried to avoid anything that was major ditch or any of those kind of things, a big steep hillside. And so Kevin mapped this out. We did this on 70 some spots. These are a lot of different farms on our home farm where we went to. And the interesting thing, and what Craig has said numerous times, is what's really interesting about this is we have a chrono sequence, is a new word for me now, but basically it lays out and says, we're taking a sample from a spot where we've been doing this practice for 13 years. We're taking a sample from a spot that we've been doing it for 5 years, and we're taking a sample from a spot we've been doing it for 1 year. And then how has that progressed? And we're also doing some woods, and we're doing some places where it's been pasture forever. And that's been really interesting as well. And I want to show this before I get into some of the details of it. But basically, we asked and got the NRCS to come out with their truck that produces these probes. I don't know if you want to maybe walk them around a little bit, Joseph. And actually, before you do that, let me show one thing you might want to be looking at is this one marked Friedman. It's the field named Friedman because someone named Friedman lived there 100. But anyways, this is a field that we've been doing for about 15 years prior to taking the sample. And it looked a lot like that when we first started. And you can see that, especially out in the sunlight, we were looking at it. But there's about 16 inches of topsoil here. Versus over in this one, if you got the plow pan, yeah, you're talking like 6. And then if you look at this real hard and with Kevin's analysis, you'll also see that there's a lot more carbon in this portion. There's a lot more carbon in the next couple of feet down. And that's what we're really trying to do. Just be careful. The one is not taped, so I don't want to leave a lot of dirt here. I might get in a little trouble. All righty. So we've gotten real good support from the NRCS to help us go do this digging. And here we are out in the middle of the woods. And the question is, why would you take a sample in the woods if you're trying to figure out how the agriculture is impacted? So, as I'm sure all of you are aware, this was all woods for thousands and thousands of years here in southern Indiana, right? And you would think with those woods, right, trees are known to pull so much carbon out of the air. Where would that carbon go? You would think that it would have sequestered it into the ground. And it does some, but not near as much as like out on the plains where they have these grasses with deep-rooted grasses that are putting, and you've seen it where they have topsoil that goes down 6 feet, 6% organic matter, where we typically start off with like 2%. So just a lot healthier soils that were created by those grasses for thousands of years, putting those roots down into the ground.
Is this a place that's always been forest?
Yes. And the NRCS verified that, which was interesting. This is right behind the house I grew up in and the house I live in now. So, you know, I said, I'm pretty sure it's been a forest forever, you know, and my dad, 92 years old. Yeah, it's been forest forever. But you never really know, right? So we drove out there. We got her just about stuck. We went out into the woods where I knew it wasn't around any of the roads to try to get a real good. And then we pulled the first sample. They looked at the core they're picking at it with a pocket knife and they're saying this is a horizon. It's been here at least 1,000 years, is what the NRCS said. I don't know how exactly they knew that. I don't know if you do, Kevin.
Well, one thing to point out is, so there has been harvesting. In these
Yes.
forests. But the point is, it's always been in forest.
Right.
So there would have been harvesting roughly
20
100
years ago.
years
Yeah.
ago with some of the old growth cuts
Harvesting of the wood.
of the
of the
trees.
trees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this landscape, and we sampled at another farm, some other woods to give us this comparison of what, Fischer Farms is doing. But those forests, just like all around here, they may have been harvested
Mhm.
at various times, but that soil has always been forest, basically.
Forest soil.
And it's interesting that the leaves come down, and I was just watching the video that Craig explained it. The leaves come down every year, right? And it's that top, I forget what it's called, 4 or something like that, but in top 6 inches, there's a lot of heavy carbon in there, but also it decays every winter and it's going back up in the air every winter. A lot of the carbon is in the leaves that are falling down to the ground, decaying and going back up. And if you think of woods, the tree is growing a little bit every year. And so that little bit of growth is not sequestering, I think, as much carbon as those leaves, but then the leaves give it back up every year. And the roots are generally slow growing in woods. A lot of them will go down, obviously, very deep, but it's not like the 4,000 pounds of ryegrass, 4,000 pounds of corn stalk every year that's putting down those roots. So we wanted to go and compare that and say, okay, this has been in woods for 1,000 years. How does that compare with ground that was cleaned or cleared off 200 years ago? It's interesting. We talked to my dad. We hadn't got him on the phone a couple days ago, and said, what did this ground look like in 1965? So we bought one of the parts of our farm back in 1965, and he had explained it to me before too. It was big fence line rows, where they had these fence rows that just kept on getting overgrown and so forth. They had planted it in corn for like 100 years. And we've got a lot of hills, as you see in some of these pictures, and you think what they had to grow corn back then was a horse with a plow. So they plowed the ground every year. Then they dissed it every year with a horse. Then as the plant was growing, they had to knock down the weeds. So they came in with a cultivator that cultivated the soil 4 or 5 times a year. All that time, they're just leaving that ground very loose, very erodible. No cover crop, but what they were trying to do is produce their 30 bushel of corn per acre, and however they could. So it's that eroded a big portion of our soils. There were big gullies and so forth on our land. My dad came in 1965, said, we're not going to do that. He cleaned it all out with the bulldozer and got all the fence rows, but then he planted it end to end in fescue, and it's been in pasture pretty well up until 2002 when I came back to the farm. So it's kind of interesting to see where was the soil in the woods, which would tell us basically where it's been for the last 1,000 years. Where was it after 100 some years of settlers coming in and clearing the ground and not taking care of it? And then my dad practiced no-till, mostly farming for quite a few years as well, and that saved some of the soil. But then where was it in 2002, and what have we done since?
And I would just add one thing, it's not just his farm, this entire unglaciated landscape down here. The reason we have these NRCS soil conservation folks working with this is because for years, they've been promoting farmers to stop doing tillage in these landscapes, right? Because for a couple centuries, basically, we've been doing that as you described, and we've been losing all this topsoil. So it's not like the Dust Bowl part where there was a drought and all your topsoil blows off, but we have a similar impact here. So they are promoting the kind of things that Fischer Farms do in our research and all this because they want to be able to demonstrate these benefits, building topsoil back and all those things for the long term.
Yeah, so Travis, who's standing there in the green t-shirt, he took a bunch of samples from our soil and used it in he's got a trailer that he goes around to a lot of different farmer conferences and so forth to show how much water our ground will hold. and they did it up at the Indiana State Fair, and it held 8 inches of water in one day. They kept on spraying another inch on, wait an hour or so. Day that 2 inches of water held on, or 2 inches of soil. So here we are, standing out in the middle of our ryegrass. This is right before we're getting ready to plant this in forage sorghum this year. But we had them all out, and we were learning a lot, that's for sure. Here I am in one of the pits. So we dug some pits with a big trackhoe as well, just to see what are the different layers of the soil. You see this little gray part here is part of the fragipan. There's these gray columns that come up from the ground, and that fragipan, that portion is a little bit softer. Right next to it, these portions will be harder. Dr. Murdoch describes the start of the fragipan as the bottom of the pot. So roots come down, they hit that, and they go sideways. Right? They also, the water does the same thing. And when you see water come out on a spring on the side of a hill, it's because the water came down and then went out to the side of the hill. So that fragipan, we need to get it loosened up to where the roots can get down into it, and the water will sit in there. When we get our 6.5 inches in rain in January, that will fill back up the lower portions to where that's available in the summer months. So what was exciting to me, this was in June, and we found a root that was 50 inches deep. Pocket knife set. So we went also to some conventionally tilled ground. We weren't able to drive out in the middle of it, but we did take some samples. This was over at our friend Mr. Snodgrass's farm, and just to see, and basically there was no topsoil left on this field. It had all eroded off over the years because they've been conventionally farming it for a long, long time.
Grow corn there?
Yeah, and grow corn.
Victor, I have a question.
Please.
The corn on this field will not have the corn on your fields theoretically, or would it be the same?
It would not if it was the same soil type. This is a different soil type, so it's going to be different. But yeah, if you start off with the same subsoil, and then we did ryegrass for 10 years, our roots will be much deeper where that ryegrass was going on the corn. Yep. Because it will help it, as Dr. Murdoch explains, that little gap in the subsoil just gets larger and larger every year. And what's amazing, again, I can talk for ryegrass for hours, so I got to watch myself. But the exudates that ryegrass gives off has salts in it that actually break up the fragipan. So it's not just a physical breaking up of the fragipan, it's a chemical breakup. Dr. Murdoch's got a lot of videos and information on their website, University of Kentucky, and it shows all that, where it just, they do a ryegrass root extract where they boil ryegrass roots. I'm sure it's his PhD students that are doing this, but and then they put in 2 lumps of fragipan, one in just water and one in a ryegrass extract. And 2 weeks later, the ryegrass extract is just all cloudy, dirty water. There's no lump of fragipan anymore. And where it's in water, it just looks like you put a rock in the water, clear water. Yes.
So for purposes of this discussion of the soil, is the forage sorghum sort of a placeholder?
No, it's, I could probably do a whole nother presentation on forage sorghum, but forage sorghum is similar to corn, but it takes less nutrients to grow and less time to grow and less water to grow. So we're looking at it as an alternative to corn. The bad thing is it doesn't have quite the energy level. So we have to look at it from a complete life cycle assessment to get the cows enough energy. Are we going to have to buy more grain to do that? And so we've been experimenting with it for 5 years. Next week, I'm actually speaking at the Organic Grain Conference to talk about our results of that. And we're going to continue pushing along those lines in forage sorghum. I just don't know, 5 years from now, are we still going to be growing corn? I don't know. There's a lot of variabilities in that as well to get a good forage sorghum stand. One thing I really like about it is we can plant it 1st of June, and then we can harvest it about middle of August. And then we can plant our fall cover crop, our ryegrass, by the middle of August instead of waiting until September. We get a lot more growth. Yes.
The sorghum be all for grazing, or will you make any syrup from it?
We won't make syrup from it. We actually have an Amish farmer that makes syrup and we sell that. But no, there's actually 3 different types of sorghums, or 4 types. There's grain sorghum. We're not planting that. We're going to let that for the grain farmers. There's forage sorghum, which what we plant only gets about 7 or 8 feet tall. It has 2 to 3 inch nodes between its leaves. It's a very growthy plant, but you can't graze it very well. We're trying, but it's a little bit more difficult to graze because it's got a big, thick stalk on it. But generally what we do with that is we chop it for silage. Then there's also sorghum Sudan grass, which is more for grazing. It'll grow 12 feet tall. I played around with it behind my house in a field. Every day it averaged 5 inches of growth. It's crazy. It's a plant from Africa, loves the heat. And anyways, so we're experimenting with all those different varieties except for the grain sorghum, trying to figure out when to graze it, when to chop it, how it works on our soil. One interesting thing is there's a lot of discussion with some other farmers online about they feel like it's putting down more roots than corn, even though it's got a shorter time window to grow.
The forest sorghum.
Yes.
So one thing I would add too, I don't know, probably you're not going to get too much in the life cycle assessment, which
Just a little bit.
we're
Yep.
very preliminary on that anyway, but a really exciting part is with the forage sorghum is, as Dave's told me, it requires maybe 80% less nitrogen fertilizer than the corn. And so we're talking all about soil carbon. We're analyzing that. We model this stuff. So we try to scale up to his whole farm, talk about how much carbon is he sequestering. Big part on the soil side, though, is also because he does use fertilizer, we have nitrous oxide emissions coming out of the soil. And that's a greenhouse gas that's powerful. So life cycle assessment, we balance all these things out with models and data and all this. And so this may be a big solution for him to reduce the overall carbon footprint or greenhouse gases if he doesn't have to use as much nitrogen by switching from corn to this sorghum and sorghum Sudan grass.
Well, maybe I'm missing something, but you produce tons of fertilizer. So what are you going to do with it if you don't use it?
The manure,
Yeah.
we'll continue to do that, but we also have to buy chemical fertilizer.
Oh, so it's not sufficient.
No.
Like, oh, okay. So
Corn,
you're buy-in.
corn requires a lot of nitrogen.
That's nitrogen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I got it.
So these I've already shown as samples, but basically Kevin and his group went around, took those 70, then he broke them down into the top 1 foot, the next 1 foot, and then the bottom 2 feet. And sent those off to labs. You want to talk any more about that, Kevin? What you're doing with
I
that?
don't know, did Craig get you the updated figures or do you have that in?
I don't have those on here.
I think well, I actually printed out the earlier version. I can throw these around, but well, here's what we're seeing in the upper layer, the upper foot. So for any of you folks who have been involved with ag or, soil sampling, those are all done in 6 inches, right? Conventionally, figure out what kind of nutrients or things that you need. So our cores actually go down to 1 foot at the upper level. And what these are showing is, the conventional farms, the ones that are just going to convert over to the Fischer Farms sort of system. This is the actual carbon stocks. So we measure all the stuff in concentrations, we correct for bulk density, and we figure out how many tons of CO2 equivalent carbon is there per acre in the soil. And what we see here is on the conventional ones, so these are the farms that are not Dave's farm, that are just starting, some of our partners, they're down here. After 4 to 5 years of doing this Fischer Farms type system, you see up, and then the longer ones that have been 10 to 15 years, we got about double the soil carbon that's in here. And in fact, over here, this is the forest. So it's way more than the forest, even what we can do. And these are pasture fields. So the ability, a lot of people want to talk about, we need to just turn everything back into forests. Forest in the deeper stuff with those roots, are doing better. So he's talking a lot about
Mhm.
deep-rooted stuff. We do see some of that, but the forest still looks good there. But if you're talking about how can we quickly build up soil carbon stocks, this kind of system is just way outperforming a transition to a forest regime. So that's a really interesting finding.
So now we're going to talk about life cycle assessment. So this portion is basically happening on the farm, but now we have to look at, well, what are all the products that we bring into the farm? So fuel for the tractors, chemicals that we do use on the farm, such as the fertilizers and so forth. Distillers grains, that's the byproduct of the bourbon factory in Louisville that we buy, and we feed that to our cows. They love it, and there's no alcohol in it. And then we also buy straw and hay from the neighbors and so forth. So Kevin and Fu are really looking at, and it's just part of the spreadsheet, but just to show you, they're looking at all the things we're pulling in. What's the carbon intensity? What's the carbon that went into producing that product? And how are we stacking those up versus how much carbon we're putting in the ground? So this is now, we've done a lot of the dirt work. Now we're getting into more of the life cycle assessment and really looking at it across the whole deal. Yes, you have a question? Oh, I'm sorry. Thought I saw one out of the corner of my eye. So again, that's going to look like from when the calf is born until there's a steak on the plate. How much does it take? That whole thing.
What did the numbers mean in the previous graph?
So this is how much we're consuming. Then this is like on corn that we purchase. For every bushel of corn, we have to add in 15.6 kilograms of CO2 equivalent. Basically saying, to produce that corn, a farmer someplace released that much CO2 up in the air. So we have to put that back in the ground to try to get to carbon negative.
Is this a balance sheet or is this just all the negative?
That down below here was all the positive. How much carbon we put in. I just didn't.
That's very transparent of you,
You
Dave.
just said that's the bad news.
Yeah, exactly. And and there are, and and I highlighted the worst ones. And I look at it, those are my levers. That's where I can reduce our carbon footprint, And it turns out the fuel that we use, it's on here. I think it's up above. Anyway, I always thought, fuel that we're burning in the tractor, that's minuscule. It's a big number.
Yeah, and so just to be clear on the corn, he was talking about kilograms of CO2 equivalent. What that means is it's really not the CO2 releasing so much as he mentioned. It's more about what is that overall carbon footprint in a CO2 equivalent. The big thing with conventional farm production is all that nitrogen fertilizer. To produce nitrogen fertilizer, we do it with fossil fuels, big industrial process, and that has a huge greenhouse gas impact.
Right.
Then you've got the nitrous oxide and all that part. So this metric encapsulates all that stuff for very detailed analyses and gives us a point about, hey, every bushel that he has to bring in, if he supplements, has this much higher carbon footprint than the silage, corn silage that he produces, for example. We're seeing. So these are all, as you said, the levers where ultimately this project hopefully could be the first in the world to show we can grow carbon negative beef. Because that whole concept, people are like, they know about methane and they're just like, what are you talking about? That's impossible. But we believe it could be possible because of all of his soil practices. And then you start to figure out where are those pieces that we can really bring this down.
And that 234,000, that's where sorghum becomes interesting, I guess. Did you could replace that?
Well, this portion, if we do forage sorghum and we keep the energy level in the diet the same for the cattle, the corn will have to go up. The corn that I purchase. But the corn silage that I raise, its footprint will be, well, the forage sorghum will be less than the corn silage that I raise. But this number will have to go up unless I can figure out how to raise forage sorghum at a higher energy level to where I don't need to buy more grain. And that's why I'm working. There's a Cropland is the big folks across the US that are really focused on forage sorghum. And they see it, and when you go out west and, with the aquifers dropping, big cornfields out there that are irrigated, and dropping that down. If they could switch them over to forage sorghum or maybe a grain sorghum, they could use a lot less water. So I'm working with them to try to figure out how can we get that maximum nutrients in our forage sorghum, so I can switch over to that, so I don't have to buy more corn.
Well, I think also a component, if we're raising the corn, I think we're doing it in a much more carbon friendly manner than fertile soils that require way more fertilizer per acre.
Right.
Because we have more fertile soil, we don't have to use near the fertilizers that my grandpa had to use back in the day.
You can't go out and pull off a few years to plant next year.
So yeah, so that 15.6 is kind of a national number, but I think we all believe in-house that our Fischer Farms number would be significantly lower if we were growing our own corn.
But one thing we are doing along those lines is, so this is a farm owned by a friend of mine who's seeing what we're doing and saying, I'd really like to see you do that to our farm. As far as building the topsoil, he and his family have over 400 acres of crop ground that now, and every year he's renting me a little bit more, so I could take that ground and raise grain corn. That's another option.
So I wanted to get into the weeds.
Yes, please. I love the weeds.
Lamprey's weeds, which is the kelp.
Yes.
So I have I want to know about this is not an Indiana product.
Right.
This is not something we do in Indiana.
Right.
So it makes me dubious. And so I want to hear what you're thinking about.
Okay. So first of all, for everybody's viewpoint, kelp has been shown in some studies to reduce methane emissions by 80%. Huge number in cattle. So basically, and how it does that, it's the certain type chemical that's in the kelp and microbes, it's actually microbes in the kelp, change that rumination process to where they're not belching up as much methane. For years, we've been feeding kelp to our cattle, but we've been feeding brown kelp. Brown kelp doesn't have as significant of an impact. We're trying to find it through research studies and so forth, how much of an impact it has. We also feed probiotics to our cattle. We don't feed antibiotics. So to help keep them healthy, and probably a lot of you are out there, myself included, eat probiotics. So we do that. Probiotics are showing a 10 to 20% reduction in methane emissions. Biochar is another thing you can feed your cattle to reduce that methane emissions. But the most promising one is the red kelp. And so there are, what we know of now, right now, there are 3 companies in the world trying to produce a lot of red kelp. California is all over this. How can we get more red kelp and feed all our dairy cows and so forth? The issue with it is it has to be grown in the tropics. So two of the companies are in Hawaii and one's in Australia. The one in Australia seems to be leading the way. They started a big trial 1st of January in Australia. We're hoping to start a trial sometime this year on our farm with that same red kelp. But they're just kind of getting started with it. We don't know what the costs are going to be. We don't know exactly how much we're going to have to include, but it's probably only like a gram per head per day. It's a very small amount.
But all of these items are things that require a significant amount of industrial production and transportation, and are not local. I mean, even the probiotics, you don't have yogurt cultures in the back for you,
right,
that you feed them. So I mean, these are all external inputs
they are, and
that
goes back to this. But what we're seeing, so this is Diamond B, this is the probiotics, and based on that, we feed 5,200 pounds of that a year. 376 kilograms CO2 equivalent. So if I'm doing my math right, that's way less than an acre of ground. We're putting carbon down in an acre that will account for all that requirement of bringing in those probiotics. And
yeah, the LCA is the key, but I can tell you from prior work, which are the benchmarks that we're using, which are huge studies that were done, published just a few years ago, actually, for the whole beef industry across the US. One of those studies is what we call farm to gate. So everything that's happening on the farm when the calf is born to the point that it heads off the farm. And the other one looks at the full value chain. So we have these great benchmarks for what the US beef production system, local to the Midwest, has as a carbon footprint. And we account for everything, like you're talking about, any input that comes in, all that upstream stuff gets accounted for. But overall, we know from the prior work that 80% or so of his carbon footprint to produce that beef is the on-farm part. Because it's all about the feed and the methane and all this stuff. So early on, people are like, well, let's add solar panels on our processing plant. And let's use biodiesel. These are all nice things. They all help. But to get to carbon neutral or carbon negative beef, you've got to do rigorous LCA, and you've got to actually know, as Dave said, what are the big levers here? I can't spend my resources on solar panels when that's only going to get me a little bit of the way. It's these other big things that we're trying to target so we can make a difference.
One of the biggest levers is the methane emissions, and feeding kelp looks like the best option to reduce that. And we're actually later this year, we're hoping to set up the lasers that go across our pens to measure how much methane is going up. Just a few minutes left, so I'm not going to dive into that, but we're going to really look at, okay, how much methane are we actually getting reduced by feeding this? But then it gets into, well, how do we get 1 gram of methane to every one of our cows? You know, a lot of the cows are just eating grass. So how do we get them to eat that 1 gram of kelp, not methane? Thank you. Yeah, one gram of kelp to all of our cattle. So are we going to go bucket feed all those cows, which is a fine option, but somehow or another, we got to get that to all those cattle. One of the interesting studies in California, they're looking at if you feed certain microbes at the very early stages of a calf's life, they think it may impact how much methane the calf releases over its entire life. So there's a conference in May that it looks like I'm going to be going to kind of understand more what they're doing there. Did I answer your questions? Okay, good. Yes.
Thanks. I'm a nutrition scientist, and so all of this is really new to me, and it's just fascinating.
Right.
And I saw that your life cycle ended at the, steak.
Mm-hmm.
What about the body? Like
The offal, we call it. Yeah. The rest of it, or the human body.
the human body.
Okay.
The human body. So my perspective is like, is this healthy? The product you're making, is it healthier? I shouldn't say healthy, healthier
Right.
than the standard. And I can think, as you were talking, I was imagining some reasons why it could be.
Yes.
But has that been tested, or is anyone doing that?
We're a little afraid of scope creep, but I'm very interested in that. And we've sent off some samples. Really haven't gotten into the details on it yet, but I'd really be interested in the omega-3s versus the omega-6 and those kind of things, as well as the protein and so forth. We feel like ours is healthier just from the standpoint of there's no phosphates, there's no chemicals added and so forth to the meat. So just being clean meat, we think it's healthy. The other side, as you've seen on some of our pictures, we're very much so driven to have high marble beef. So our beef is generally going to have a higher fat content, and especially like grass finished and so forth. But we think the last 10 years is fat's not all that bad, right? So yes, I'd like to get into that as much as possible. I just don't know if we're going to have the time.
One
But
thing I
we'll
can
do
say
it.
that the people that led the kelp studies, he's referencing, this is all a group out of UC Davis. And first questions they had were, well, if we start putting this kelp and it makes its way through this, particularly the dairy, is there an impact here or something else? So they did a lot of work to talk about human nutrition with their product and showed, no, we don't see that there's any detrimental effect on the kelp, but I'm happy to send you some of that stuff too. And as Dave said, there's a big conference in May where kind of the international UC Davis too, because there was kind of meetings.
And one of the interesting things to build on that is we feed our cattle very high forage diet. We feed them some distillers, like when from the time the calf is born till they're 8 months old or so forth, they're out with their mothers. But we also make sure they have really good forage diet. So they're growing at a good rate. They stay nice and healthy during that time period. Then from 800 pounds to 1,000 pounds, we're feeding them a diet that's generally sometimes it's ryegrass grazing, but a lot of times it's also corn silage that they're getting fed with some distillers grains. So it's a good, healthy diet, but it's not a high grain content diet. Then for those last 4 months or so, they're fed corn silage with a maximum of 20% grain. That's kind of our rule of thumb. We don't want to go over that because, you know, I don't know where the break off is, but if you get too high, you get the cattle to where they just have too much acidosis, you know, and just not a healthy rumen anymore. And, you know, the big feedlots are okay feeding them at 80% grain, and it's okay that 2% die. Yeah. And so we're staying away from that. We want them really healthy, and we max out at 20%. So we think our omega-3 levels will be higher than the standard beef industry because of that. We're not going to be like grass finished. One of the interesting things Kevin was talking about earlier is they've done life cycle assessments, and there's this place called White Oak Pastures down in Georgia, and they're big in grass finished and so forth. One of the issues is when you look at the carbon footprint on grass finished, it's generally, it's not better, I'll put it that way, than the conventional market because the calf takes so long to grow. You know, if it takes 2.5 years for that calf to get to where they harvest it versus 16 months out in the West and the feedlots, well, that calf's alive a lot longer. It's belching a lot more during that whole time period. So, and it uses a lot more land, all those kind of reasons. You know, grass finished isn't necessarily the answer to get to a reduced carbon footprint. But again, the data is going to tell us more of that. We're jumping ahead a little bit, and you know, with some of these assumptions.
I'll just say that our nutrition group here on campus is doing research on not what you're doing, but comparing beef versus vegetable-based diets. So we are interested in research on the, you know, health of the beef, and it would be lovely to compare, you know, conventional versus I don't know if I've seen that. So
I'd love to work with you on that because it's a personal interest of mine as well. And just the nutritional value of vegetables that we're eating and how they have decreased over the last 50 years. To me, personal interest that.
I know some people may not believe it's, we're getting our money's worth. Out of Dave, and but so feel free. You have their classes and appointments, but and I think you still got some more slides.
Yes, yep. I got a few more slides, and I'm here to talk as long as you guys want to talk.
Okay, I apologize. I just need to release a couple of people.
No, fine. I understand. Some people got to go.
Please keep going.
Okay. All right. Yeah, and feel free if you got to leave. Don't worry. You're not going to mess me up here. So one other thing I want to show is we are working on making our processing more efficient. So these are not our machines. These are machines we want to buy. The 4 burgers per second on the right is what that machine will max out at. I tried to count them and I can't. This might slow it. But anyways, this is going to be part of our project. USDA is not funding this. This is one of the things they drew their line through. But we're hoping that our increased sales and so forth. And what this will do is allow us to reduce our pricing. Obviously, since we're butchering in a plant that we're doing 30 head in a week, the big beef cattle plants do 6,000 head a day. That's our big cost issue. And so we have to figure out ways to put in more automated lines and so forth to reduce our cost. So the last part of our grant is just the education and marketing portion, with Joseph and Heather are going to be really are already spearheading. You know, where they come up and talk to students at IU. We also do this with a lot of retailers where we're going out, having our product there, but also having some detailed information that people want to learn about it. Yes.
Do you think that we do all of your own butchering?
Oh, we have a partner that we work with called Sander Processing. They own the building right next to us where they do all of our processing for us.
And something I've heard of before at butchering facilities is sometimes they can't guarantee that you're getting back the same meat.
Yeah, I've heard that rumor quite a bit as well. I think it's true in deer. Yeah. So first of all, in the plant that we use, it's 90% they run is ours. And the other 10% is what they sell out their front case. So there's not a lot of other beef around.
We actually have that traceability all the way to the ribeye steak, that your tag number is pinned to the carcass. And so we actually use it for our method. We grade each steer that comes through. We have this very long spreadsheet that tells us the quality of that animal, but then also allows us to go back upstream and say, who is its mom, who is its dad, and really trace those genetics by bull and those different things. We keep a very high level of traceability in our facility, but I can't speak necessarily for other.
But that seems like a factor
Oh, yes.
as other people try to take this on.
Yes, yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, and now to my wrap-up slide. I think you can pretty well guess all of this, that, we're really focused on what is our carbon footprint versus conventional beef, expansion of our network to other producers. And that's really going to be a big focus of mine as we go forward. I've spent a lot of time kind of organizing, helping the geospherics folks with our thing, but now I've got to do a lot of outreach, going out and talking to farmers about this as well. Consumer awareness, to me, that's a big portion as well. And it's interesting when we go talk to our customers, who's interested in this, right? Some restaurants are. Every institution we talk to is interested in this. A lot of individual consumers are interested in this as well. So we've just got to be ready to kind of educate.
It's interesting. Sometimes the people you think really would care aren't as concerned. And then like the Indiana Pacers, and they were super excited about the regenerative agriculture side of things. But then when I talk to the Colts, they want to know how nutritious that meat is. They want to know how it was raised, how cleanly it was processed. It's like, even though they're in the same kind of general area, they just still have different priorities. And it changes even within the room who's interested in what.
I thought it was interesting. Colts were real interested in the nutritional value. The Pacers are like, just give us the ribeyes. And you would think,
it's like the cardio versus like the strength guys. The linemen want like flank steaks, like lean fillets, and then the Pacers are running, 5 miles a day in practice or whatever, and they're like, yeah, we'll take ribeyes. And they also love their chicken fingers and ranch. Apparently, is obviously they don't get from us, but
yeah,
it's just funny how the diets change so much.
So the last part of the previous slide was, us working with Jody Smith on the, taking this now to other universities and explaining what IU has been working on for 10 years or more, so forth. I remember in 2009, a group of IU folks came to our farm to talk about our carbon footprint and how it compared with grass finished and so forth. So we've been talking about this for a long time. I know IU's been working on it longer than that. There are other universities that don't have that kind of history and that knowledge and so forth. So Jody and Heather are going to be going out to those universities and kind of explaining this and, what are all the different issues and how does it relate to what happens at the cafeteria and so forth. So, obviously a very big, important part of this, as well as, we're very open to doing, hosting tours, getting into the weeds and classes and so forth. So just let us know how we can help with the education side of the students. More than willing to do that, especially as we go through this and we get more data back. That's going to be interesting too. And we'll have to talk for 5 hours next time.
Well, James has been key, and I'm going to give him a shout out because Kate, who you showed in the early part, she's a research scientist with us now, finishing her PhD here. We met her through James' class. She came out a year or so ago.
Yeah.
And I showed up mysteriously on a recruiting mission that people didn't know who that was.
I didn't know you were doing
But I was
that.
looking at the 12 students or whatever you had, and I was kind of gauging that, and she just stood out as being, very passionate and obviously very bright. So So we're very happy, and every time you bring a class out, let us know, we can maybe recruit some more awesome people.
They see Jody's out here on Zoom. So Jody, if you got anything to add. I can hear you.
Something in the chat.
I don't know if you can hear me.
Oh, here I am.
Yeah,
I'd say different to like be staring at the screen.
you're a little quiet, Jody, but I think we can hear you.
Oh, yeah.
Number of farms, what you're actually arguing. All right, so our outreach goal, number of farms, we roughly have said about 100. So we work with 22 farmers now. Some of them just graze our cows. They don't own any cows themselves. They have the pasture. We bring our cows out. That's probably the most popular way of working with us. But we also have guys who raise calves from start to finish, but we work closely with them on the genetics and so forth. So about 100 farms. To answer that question, geography, basically from Martinsville to Bowling Green, Kentucky, to a little bit into Illinois. We're trying to do like a 3 to 4 hour drive from our farm over to kind of on the other side of Louisville.
Last field day, how many farmers were at that?
70.
Annually?
1 or 2. Yep. Sure. Just yep. I'll pass out cards here afterwards. But yep. Yeah, I'm happy to do this. And it's really worked out well. One thing I really strongly encourage in that is we set it up to where our farm from end to end is about 3.5 miles long. And on those field days, we set up different stations and we have an expert talking about each area along the way. And what I always tell people presenting, tell them the bad stuff, tell them the good stuff. Like this sorghum Sudan grass, I told them last year, I'm not ready to recommend it. We're still figuring out how to graze it appropriately. It has not paid off for us financially. The only reason we're really doing it is health of our cattle and trying to improve our regenerative portion of it. But for a guy, you know, and again, most of these farmers, they get villainized sometimes, but they're out there trying to put food on their, you know, their family's table, send their kids off to college. They got to worry about what's going to make money for me this year. You know, how am I going to be financially viable as a farm? Every year they're thinking about that and so forth. So we have to be careful to make sure everything we do with them is a good financial option for them.
Jody had a comment that failed to mention.
The grant also prioritized socially disadvantaged farmers and those impacted by climate change. This is very true. So we're looking on, we're looking at many different routes. You know, we're not really so interested in a guy who's got 4,000 acres and it's corn, soybeans, and so forth. That's not the typical farm. We're looking to work with more smaller farmers that are really interested in raising good quality genetics. How do you manage your nitrogen cycle? Good question, and we are still working through those issues. We've spent a lot of time on carbon. Now we're getting ready to spend a lot of time on nitrogen in our analysis. But just real quickly, what we do is when we harvest that ryegrass off in the spring, again, it takes all the nitrogen with it. And I can go through all kinds of details to explain that. But basically, there's very little nitrogen left in the ground when we go plant that seed corn. So when we plant that corn, we also put nitrogen in the ground 2 inches over and 2 inches down away from the seed. We put enough just for it to get started for about 5 to 6 weeks, and that'll supply its nitrogen. Then when the plant is about a foot tall or so, we will come and do what's called side dressing, where we're putting more nitrogen on at that time. Again, what we're trying to do is spoon feed the nitrogen. Just want to give it a little bit. All right, your ground will hold only so much nitrogen. Once you get above that level, it's going to leach out. So we'll put some on then, and then we'll put some on right at about 29 inches, because that's the last time we can get onto our fields without knocking down corn, and we're putting on the rest of the nitrogen. One thing we're going to be doing this study is, does it make sense for us to hire, you know, they have equipment out there where you can put it on even later. So we may be doing that because corn really wants its nitrogen while it's putting that ear on, and those last, I don't know, maybe 5 weeks or so, 5, 6 weeks is where it needs all that nitrogen.
So I'm trying to understand scale. in what you're talking about, especially with your relationship with the smallholders. So are you sort of looking at those farms and saying, well, what are you good for? Like, are you good for, okay,
Yes, I would say we got to meet them where they're at. What resources do they have? People wise, fields wise, what are they looking to get out of it? And then we are at
so they
any,
might take on part of the life cycle of the beef.
yes,
And then, yeah. And then similarly for your the production of your silage and so forth. Outside of that geographic area, because I'm interested in the whole idea of like we're sort of in marginal lands
Mhm.
where the cattle are.
yes.
So are you going outside of that to think about the production of the silage in terms of the network you're imagining?
Yeah, the hard thing with silage is it's very expensive to haul because it's so bulky and so forth. So it's got to be within I don't know, 15-minute kind of drive, something like that. Kind of a small area to where you're going to store it and then where you're going to feed it has to be pretty well right beside it to be economically viable. But we were working with a very big farm down in Kentucky. Unfortunately, the owner passed away. And that was an ideal setup to where he had 300 acres of really high productive ground, and then he had pastures next to it. So we're looking for those kind of scenarios.
Maybe
That,
I don't know, like the Southwest Indiana could work, right? Because it's like side by side upland and
yes.
plateau or in the middle. Plateau.
And what I've seen is basically where the hills level off, that's where you can grow the corn silage. So it shouldn't have to be trucked very far. And a lot of our farmers do this already. They're producing silage, some don't. So it's not totally out of the realm possibility for them.
It's a lot of equipment.
It's
just a big barrier.
That is a huge barrier for silage.
So do you imagine equipment that would be kind of resourceable to your network of producers, or?
That's what we had in the original proposal. That got cut. But we actually have 3 machines like that, 3 of those yellow machines. And I just bought the 3rd one with the thought in mind that we might go out and do some custom work for people that are feeding cattle for us.
Mm-hmm.
There are other guys who I can also recommend in different geographic area that will come out and make silage. And so that farmer doesn't have to buy the silage equipment. You can get it custom done for you.
I think it's exciting. It's exciting economically for them.
Farms that maybe geography is an issue of just like proximity to our farm. That's where it sometimes works better for them to just have cow calf pairs for us when they have summer months. So we'll take a trailer load of mamas and babies, let them graze all summer long or until they run out of grass, and then we'll bring them back home. And that's a great way for us to partner with them. Even if, maybe they're not doing that, the silage feeding component.
Right. Very good part. There's going to be like mini hubs. Guy who finishes out on silage, he buys calves from this guy. That guy doesn't do any finishing out, but he's still part of the program and he's making more money than he has before because he's raising real good quality genetics and so forth. We'll pay him more for those calves than that.
He's not taken to auction.
Exactly. But you got to have the right genetics. All of this really starts off with the right genetics. So it's Angus Shorthorn cross, but even within Angus, there's a subset. So we bought some Angus calves from a guy down in Kentucky a couple of weeks ago, and they did not perform.
I always give Arby's as the example. Not all Angus is created equal.
Yeah.
Folks, we better wrap it up. But you said you had time to stick around.
Yep,
If,
yep.
folks got questions. So
Yep.
Thank you very
Now
much.
I got cards. Sure. Thank you. Yeah, and I've got cards if anybody wants to contact me in the future.
I think we'll be back on in about 2 weeks. We'll have another talk going on here. I apologize. I don't know what. Yeah, don't know what it is, but
Yeah.
The boss is,
Yeah, good talk.
oh yeah, this is gone. Thanks to folks that joined online. You probably can't see me, but thank you if you can hear me. So.